Guys, I'm currently in Stafford and I need to hurry up, even though I can't walk because my feet have got bloody blood blisters on them. I'm going to miss my train, but I've just been filming down there at what was the Dog and Partridge. It's now a dental hospital, or a dental practice, or whatever you call it. Anyway, if you like your true crime, then this one is going to get you off. So, Stafford Town Centre, let's get into it.
If you walk through Stafford today, there's a building that most people would probably pass without giving it a second thought. It looks clean, modern and functional, doing a completely different job to the one that it was built for. Because what now operates as a dental clinic was once a public house known as the Dog and Partridge. And back in the late 1800s, it became the scene of a murder that shocked the town. In January of 1875, the Dog and Partridge wasn't just somewhere to grab a drink. It was a proper working beerhouse. The kind of place where tradesmen would gather at the end of a long day. And on one particular weekend, two men sat inside who knew each other far better than most. One was Thomas Nield, a 49-year-old man, and the other was his nephew, John Stanton. Some reports say 18 years of age, but many others say 22. Both of them working in the shoemaking trade, and both of them drinking together that evening. Now at first, it would have looked like any other night, but as the hours went on, something shifted between them. And what started as conversation turned into an argument that began to escalate. Reports at the time suggest that the row may have started over something that sounds almost trivial. A comment made by Nield that his wife should no longer be washing Stanton's clothes without being paid for it. But whatever the exact trigger was, it clearly struck a nerve, because Stanton became aggressive, using violent language and even striking his uncle during the confrontation. And with this, the landlady, sensing that things were getting out of hand, stepped in and ordered Stanton to leave. And as he was forced out of the pub, he didn't just go quietly, because before he walked away, he made it very clear that it wasn't over, reportedly saying words to the effect that he would do his uncle in, even if he had to wait all night. Now this is where the story takes a darker turn, because Stanton didn't just cool off or head home and leave it there. Instead, he went back to his lodgings, where he was seen by another resident going into his workbench, picking up a sharp pointed shoemaker's knife, placing it into his breast pocket and heading straight back out into the night. And when he returned to the Dog and Partridge, there was no immediate scene, no shouting or chaos. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He came back in, sat down quietly for a few minutes opposite his uncle, almost as if nothing had happened. And then, after a short while, he moved closer, sitting to the right-hand side of the man, calm enough that nobody around him seemed to suspect what was about to happen. And then, in a moment witnessed by several people inside the boozer, Stanton reached into his pocket, pulled out the knife and without warning plunged it straight into the chest of his uncle. There was no drawn-out struggle and no back and forth, just a single decisive act. Nield didn't even speak after it happened. He simply collapsed to the floor, unconscious, while Stanton, incredibly, didn't run in panic or try to hide what he'd done, but instead he walked calmly out of the building as the rest of the room sat in shock, too stunned to react. The landlady shouted after him, calling out, "You little villain, what have you done? You've stabbed your uncle." And Stanton's response was as cold as anything else in this story, because he simply said, "I've done it, and I'm willing to be taken." Outside, he threw the blood-stained knife over a nearby garden wall, where it was later recovered. And when another man, having heard what had happened, asked him why he'd done it, Stanton replied just as bluntly, saying, "I've done it, and I intended to." He didn't get far. Within a short distance, he was arrested before he could leave the town. And while all this was unfolding, Thomas Nield was still alive, but only just. The wound was fatal, the knife having penetrated between the ribs and pierced the heart. And by around 8:20 the next morning, he was brown bread. Stanton was quickly charged, and the case moved through the courts at pace, with an inquest confirming that this was a deliberate act, not something done in the heat of the moment without thought. By March of that same year, the trial was held at the Stafford Assizes, where the full sequence of events was laid out in detail, including the argument, the threat, the walk back to his lodgings to collect the knife, and the return to carry out the attack. His defence attempted to argue that he'd been provoked, that his uncle had angered him and even struck him, and that the charge should be reduced to manslaughter, but the judge made it clear that nothing in the evidence supported that version of events, especially given the time and intent shown in leaving, arming himself, and then coming back to finish what he'd already threatened to do. The jury didn't take long to reach a decision. Stanton was found guilty of willful murder, and when asked if he had anything to say for himself, he admitted what he'd done, stating plainly that he knew he'd stabbed his uncle and that he was willing to suffer for it. The sentence then came, and the sentence was death. Not long after, within the walls of Stafford Gaol, John Stanton was executed for the murder committed inside of what was the Dog and Partridge. In the time leading up to his execution, reports describe a noticeable change in him, becoming quieter, more withdrawn, and showing signs of genuine remorse as he spent time with the prison chaplain. He was visited by members of his family, including his wife, but those meetings seemed to weigh heavily on him, leaving him visibly low in spirit, and there's even an account of his mother attempting to see him, though there was no real recognition between them, as she'd left him when he was only 2.5 years old. On the morning of the execution, as the moment came, the rope was placed around his neck, and his final words were recorded as "Lord have mercy on my soul." When the drop fell, death was not immediate, and he struggled for several minutes before the executioner had to adjust the position of his body to bring it to an end. And that's the part of the story that's easy to forget when you're looking at the building today, because the Dog and Partridge is no longer a pub, and the people walking past it now have no connection to what happened inside those walls nearly 150 years ago. But the building's still there, and for a brief moment in 1875 it wasn't just a place to drink. It became the setting for an argument, a threat, a return, and a single act that ended a man's life, and set another on a path that would end at the gallows just weeks later. So the next time you pass it, it's worth asking yourself, how many people walk by without ever knowing what really happened inside? So rest in peace, Thomas Nield.